Imagine this. Australia could slash its immigration intake by a shocking 80%. Yes, you heard that right. Leaked documents suggest a secret plan that could completely reshape the future of the country. Fewer workers, fewer students, fewer families moving in, and millions of lives changed overnight. But why would a nation built on migration even consider such a drastic move? Is it the housing crisis? Is it politics? Or is there something much bigger going on behind closed doors? These aren't just wild rumors. They're whispers from inside government corridors. And if true, they could alter everything from jobs and healthcare to culture and national security. Stay with me, because in this video we're uncovering 10 shocking reasons why Australia might want to pull the immigration handbrake, and trust me, you'll want to hear every single one. Number 10. Global trends. Here's something that might surprise you. Australia isn't alone in rethinking immigration. In fact, if you zoom out and look at what's happening worldwide, you'll notice a powerful trend. Countries everywhere are quietly tightening their borders. Take the United Kingdom, for example. Once open to large migration flows, it's now slashing visas and making it harder for families to reunite. In the United States, immigration has become one of the hottest political battlegrounds, with calls for stricter border controls growing louder every year. Even Canada, long praised for its welcoming stance, recently announced measures to slow down the number of newcomers because of rising housing and healthcare pressures. So where does this leave Australia? Well, if other Western nations are pulling back, Australia may feel pressure to do the same, both to stay in line with its allies and to respond to its own citizens who are watching these global moves unfold. After all, if the world is shifting toward tighter immigration, Australia risks being seen as too open if it doesn't follow suit. But here's the twist. Is this really about security and sustainability, or is it just political theatre? Many experts argue these restrictions are less about actual numbers and more about sending a strong message to voters, a message that says, "We're in control." This global domino effect could explain why Australia's government might secretly be considering an 80% cut. Not because it wants to, but because it doesn't want to be the odd one out. So, what do you think? Is Australia simply copying global trends? Or is there a deeper agenda at play? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're finding this eye-opening, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the rest of our breakdown. Number 9. Health social services. One of the biggest pressures linked to high immigration is the strain it places on a country's health and social systems. In Australia, this challenge is becoming harder to ignore. Let's start with Medicare. Hospitals and clinics are already stretched to capacity, with waiting times for surgeries and emergency rooms hitting record highs. Now imagine adding hundreds of thousands of new arrivals every year. Even if most migrants are young and healthy, the extra demand still puts enormous pressure on doctors, nurses, and resources. For everyday Australians, this could mean longer queues, delayed appointments, and reduced quality of care. But healthcare isn't the only system under stress. Social services like public housing, welfare programs, and childcare are also feeling the squeeze. With rents skyrocketing and housing availability at crisis levels, locals often feel pushed aside as more people compete for the same limited resources. Critics argue that cutting immigration could free up space in these systems, ensuring that taxpayer-funded services are prioritised for citizens who've been waiting the longest. Of course, the flip side is worth mentioning. Migrants often contribute heavily to the very systems they use, paying taxes, filling essential worker roles in hospitals, and even staffing aged care facilities. Without them, some argue, Australia's health and welfare networks could collapse entirely. Still, the leaked documents suggest that the government is paying close attention to public frustration. When people struggle to get a doctor's appointment or wait years for public housing, it creates a sense of resentment, and that resentment often gets directed at immigration. So, from the government's perspective, slashing immigration by 80% could be framed as a solution to protect healthcare and social services. Whether or not it actually works in practice, the political optics are powerful. Number 8. Cultural integration challenges. Australia is famous for its multicultural identity, often celebrated as one of the country's greatest strengths. Walk through cities like Sydney or Melbourne, and you'll hear dozens of languages, taste food from every corner of the globe, and see traditions blending together. But behind this celebration lies a sensitive debate. How quickly can immigrants adapt to the Australian way of life? For many supporters of tighter immigration, the concern isn't about diversity itself, but about the pace of change. When immigration levels rise sharply, some communities feel that their cultural identity is being diluted too quickly. questions emerge around whether newcomers are learning English fast enough, whether they are engaging in civic life, and whether they feel a shared loyalty to Australian values. Another issue is social cohesion. Large, sudden inflows of migrants can sometimes lead to isolated communities where cultural groups live separately rather than blending in. This can fuel misunderstandings, stereotypes, and even tensions between locals and new arrivals. Governments often argue that reducing immigration numbers allows more time for proper integration, ensuring that newcomers don't just live in Australia, but truly become part of it. On the other side, many Australians argue that diversity has enriched the nation in countless ways, from cuisine and festivals to innovation and global connections. They point out that past waves of migrants faced similar skepticism, yet over time became fully integrated and central to Australia's national identity. Still, when emotions run high and debates about national identity dominate politics, cultural integration challenges can become a powerful justification for drastic cuts to immigration. By presenting an 80% reduction as a way to protect Australian values, leaders can appeal to voters who fear that rapid demographic changes might leave them feeling like strangers in their own country. Number 7. Environmental sustainability. Australia is often described as a land of extremes, from its vast deserts to its fragile coastlines. But with limited water supplies, energy resources, and delicate ecosystems, population growth brings unique environmental challenges. Immigration, by driving up population numbers, is frequently blamed for putting extra strain on these already stretched resources. One of the most pressing issues is water scarcity. Much of Australia is arid, and many regions depend on unpredictable rainfall and reservoirs that are already under pressure. A larger population means higher water consumption, not just for households, but also for agriculture, industry, and energy production. Critics argue that slowing immigration could help reduce future water stress. Then there's urban sprawl. As more people arrive, cities expand outward, consuming natural habitats and farmland. This leads to the destruction of biodiversity, with native animals like koalas and bird species losing their homes. Environmental advocates warn that without careful planning, unchecked growth could permanently damage Australia's unique wildlife. Climate change adds another layer of urgency. Rising temperatures, bushfires, and extreme weather events mean Australia has to think carefully about how many people its environment can realistically support. Some policymakers suggest that cutting immigration is not just about housing or jobs, but about ensuring long-term environmental resilience. Of course, others counter that migrants are not the problem. It's poor environmental management. They argue that newcomers often live more sustainably than locals, using public transport and settling in high-density housing. Instead of blaming immigration, they call for stronger policies on renewable energy, waste reduction, and sustainable urban planning. Still, framing immigration cuts as a way to save the environment is politically powerful. It taps into Australians' pride in their natural landscapes and fears about losing them. This makes environmental sustainability a compelling reason behind the idea of an 80% reduction. Number 6. National security concerns. When governments talk about immigration, the conversation often shifts to national security. For Australia, a country surrounded by vast oceans but situated near major geopolitical hotspots, this issue carries extra weight. Cutting immigration by as much as 80% could be justified as a way to strengthen control over who enters and stays in the country. One concern is border security. Authorities argue that smaller intake numbers make it easier to properly vet applicants, ensuring that individuals with criminal backgrounds or links to extremist groups don't slip through the cracks. In a world where global terrorism, cybercrime, and organized crime networks are constantly evolving, this narrative can be very persuasive to the public. Another layer is geopolitical tension. With growing competition in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly between major powers, Australia faces pressure to carefully manage migration from certain countries. Reducing overall immigration could be framed as a precautionary step to avoid potential security vulnerabilities, such as espionage or undue foreign influence. There's also the issue of social stability. Governments sometimes argue that rapid, large-scale immigration can create pockets of disenfranchisement if newcomers struggle to integrate or find employment. These situations, if left unchecked, could foster resentment and become fertile ground for radicalization. By cutting numbers, officials claim they can focus resources on ensuring that smaller groups of migrants integrate more smoothly and securely. On the flip side, many experts warn that this reasoning risks fueling fear rather than addressing real threats. Migrants often contribute to national security themselves, serving in the armed forces, emergency services, and critical industries. They argue that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. In protecting the nation. Still, when framed through the lens of safety and protection, national security concerns become a powerful justification for drastic immigration cuts. Number 5. Strain on infrastructure. Australia's cities are growing at breakneck speed, and with that growth comes a serious challenge. Infrastructure simply isn't keeping up. Roads, schools, hospitals, and public transport networks were never designed to handle such rapid population increases. When immigration is high, these systems can quickly become overwhelmed, creating daily frustrations for locals. Take transportation as an example. In major cities like Sydney and Melbourne, trains and buses are already packed during peak hours. Adding hundreds of thousands of new residents each year means more congestion, longer commutes, and higher levels of stress for everyone trying to get to work or school. Then there's education. Overcrowded classrooms and overworked teachers are becoming the norm. Parents worry their children aren't receiving enough individual attention, while schools scramble to build new facilities to meet demand. Immigration cuts are often framed as a way to buy time for the education system to catch up. Healthcare is another critical area. Emergency departments report long waiting times, and rural hospitals are struggling to cope. With more people arriving, demand for these services skyrockets, leading many to feel that resources are being stretched too thin. Critics argue that the problem isn't immigration itself, but rather poor planning and underinvestment. They say Australia has the wealth and ability to expand infrastructure, but lacks the political will. Still, for policymakers under pressure from frustrated citizens, reducing immigration can appear to be the quickest fix. The optics are clear. If trains are less crowded, if schools feel less stretched, and if hospitals have shorter queues, the public will notice. By presenting immigration cuts as a solution to these problems, the government can gain support from voters who are tired of feeling that their infrastructure is crumbling under pressure. Number 4. Political pressure. Immigration has always been more than just an economic or social issue. It's also a political weapon. In Australia, debates around who gets to come in and in what numbers often dominate election campaigns. For politicians under pressure, proposing drastic cuts can be a way to win votes, even if the long-term impacts are unclear. Public opinion plays a huge role here. As housing costs soar, job competition intensifies, and infrastructure buckles, many voters naturally link these frustrations to immigration. Politicians, eager to appear responsive, latch onto these concerns. A proposal to reduce immigration by 80% may sound extreme, but in the political arena, bold promises can capture headlines and sway undecided voters. This isn't unique to Australia. Around the world, political leaders have discovered that immigration is one of the most emotionally charged topics. It taps into people's sense of security, fairness, and national identity. By promising cuts, politicians position themselves as defenders of the average citizen, even if the data behind those claims is more complicated. Another factor is the rise of populist movements. Smaller parties that campaign on anti-immigration platforms have been gaining traction. This puts pressure on mainstream parties to adopt tougher stances so they don't lose ground. An 80% reduction proposal could be a way to outflank rivals and prevent losing votes to more extreme voices. But politics cuts both ways. While some Australians want fewer migrants, others strongly support multiculturalism and the economic benefits that immigration brings. This creates a tricky balancing act. Still, leaked documents suggesting massive reductions point to one clear reality. The government knows immigration is a political hot button, and in times of voter discontent, it's often the easiest lever to pull. Number 3. Job market protection. One of the most common arguments for slashing immigration is the idea of protecting local jobs. With unemployment and underemployment still affecting many Australians, politicians often claim that reducing the flow of new workers will give citizens a better shot at securing stable employment. The concern is especially strong in entry-level and semi-skilled sectors. Industries like hospitality, retail, and construction often rely on migrant labour. Critics argue that when these jobs are filled by newcomers, wages stagnate because employers have a larger pool of workers willing to accept lower pay. Cutting immigration, they say, could ease competition and create conditions for wage growth among Australian workers. There's also anxiety around graduate employment. Every year, thousands of young Australians finish university only to find themselves competing with skilled migrants who may already have years of experience. For families who have invested heavily in education, this feels like an unfair playing field. On the flip side, many economists highlight that migrants don't just take jobs, they also create them. Skilled workers often fill labour shortages in healthcare, IT, and engineering, sectors where Australia struggles to meet demand. By reducing immigration too sharply, the country risks worsening staff shortages in critical industries, which could slow economic growth. Yet, from a political standpoint, job protection is a powerful narrative. It appeals directly to people's everyday struggles, the fear of being overlooked for a job or watching wages remain flat while costs of living skyrocket. For a government under pressure, an 80% cut to immigration can be sold as a bold step to put Australians first in the labour market, even if the economic reality is far more complex. Number 2, housing crisis. If there's one issue dominating conversations across Australia right now, it's the housing crisis. Prices are at record highs, rental availability is at record lows, and young Australians are increasingly locked out of the dream of owning a home. In this context, immigration becomes an easy target and a convenient explanation for why the system feels broken. Every year, tens of thousands of new migrants arrive looking for housing, whether to rent or to buy. This adds to the already fierce competition for properties, pushing prices upward and leaving many locals struggling to keep a roof over their heads. In cities like Sydney and Melbourne, bidding wars for rentals have become common, with lines of hopeful tenants stretching down the street. For families, this isn't just an inconvenience, it's a financial and emotional strain. Government officials know how politically explosive housing affordability has become. By linking immigration cuts to the idea of freeing up homes, they can present themselves as tackling one of the public's deepest frustrations. A proposed 80% reduction might be sold as a way to ease pressure on the market, giving Australians a fairer chance at securing affordable housing. Of course, not everyone agrees with this reasoning. Many experts argue that the real problem lies in supply, not demand. They point to slow construction rates, zoning restrictions, and underinvestment in social housing as the true drivers of the crisis. Without fixing these structural issues, cutting immigration may only provide a temporary or symbolic solution. Still, for a government facing voter anger, housing is a powerful battleground. By suggesting fewer arrivals, they tap into the frustrations of Australians who feel priced out of their own cities, and offer what appears to be a direct and decisive answer to one of the nation's toughest challenges. Number 1, economic pressures. At the heart of the immigration debate lies one of the most pressing concerns for everyday Australians: the cost of living. Prices for groceries, fuel, and energy continue to climb, while wages often fail to keep pace. For many, it feels harder than ever to make ends meet. Against this backdrop, reducing immigration by up to 80% is being framed as a way to ease the economic burden. The logic is simple. Fewer newcomers mean less competition for jobs, housing, and services. Advocates argue that this could slow down inflationary pressures, particularly in areas like rent and property prices. They also suggest that lower immigration might reduce demand on public spending, freeing up government resources for struggling citizens. But economics is rarely that straightforward. Migrants are not just consumers, they're also contributors. They pay taxes, fill labour shortages, and start businesses. In fact, many industries, from agriculture to healthcare, depend heavily on migrant workers. Cutting numbers too drastically could leave critical sectors short-staffed, driving up costs in other ways and slowing economic growth. There's also the question of long-term demographics. Australia has an ageing population, and without a steady stream of younger migrants, the tax base shrinks while healthcare and pension costs rise. Economists warn that slashing immigration could create a heavier financial burden for future generations. Still, in the short term, framing immigration cuts as a way to relieve pressure on household budgets is politically appealing. When people are watching grocery bills skyrocket or struggling to pay rent, they want fast solutions. Linking immigration to these frustrations allows the government to position itself as taking decisive action, even if the true economic picture is far more complex. So what do we make of this? The KED documents suggesting that Australia could cut immigration by 80% aren't just about numbers on a page. They reflect a storm of pressures shaping the nation's future. From economic struggles and a housing crisis to healthcare, infrastructure, and cultural debates, each reason reveals a different layer of tension. Add in national security concerns and the push to align with global trends, and it's clear that this isn't a simple policy shift. It's a response to a much bigger picture. Whether these cuts would actually solve the problems is another story. Critics warn that slashing immigration could hurt the very systems it's meant to protect. the economy, the job market, even essential services. Supporters argue it's the only way to give Australians relief in an era of rising costs and stretched resources. One thing is certain, the conversation is far from over. Immigration has always been central to Australia's story, and any drastic change will reshape not only the nation's future but also how Australians see themselves in a rapidly changing world